Eco-friendly garden design can save you money, and it can make your garden look more individual, reflecting local or your personal style. And if you want to support biodiversity or wildlife, then garden design is, of course, an essential starting point. It's Alexandra here from the Middle-Sized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and I went to visit Walworth Garden, a charity that specialises in many things, eco-friendly garden design being one of them, to talk to CEO Oli Haden on how we can be more sustainable in our garden design. And I have to say, he said some quite unexpected things, so do be prepared to have some of your ideas turned upside down. The Walworth Garden is an oasis, only a few hundred yards away from one of London's busiest roundabouts, the Elephant and Castle. But as soon as you step through the gates, you are in a different world. So, Oli, tell me what you do here at Walworth Garden.
So my role is Chief Executive and Head Gardener. Walworth Garden is a charity of some 37 years standing. We specialise in environmental gardening. We're accredited by City and Guilds to teach at level 2. We run therapy sessions in gardening. We propagate our own plants, so we try to reintroduce into the country the concept of propagation. And we run an environmental landscaping company, which I'm involved with.
What I'd like to know is, if you're thinking about landscaping your garden, there's basically 3 factors really, aren't there? There's style, there's cost, and there's the environmental impact. So when a client comes to you and says, I want to have my garden landscape, how do you help them through those particular balancing act?
I start by asking them what they're going to use their garden for. And so once they've told me that, most people will want, I guess, a patio of some kind. They might want a lawn. They may want some fencing done. They mostly don't consider a pond, but I do introduce the concept of wildlife ponds very quickly. And then once they've established with me what they will use the garden for, then I start providing alternatives. So they say, oh, I've seen this stone that I'd like to use. And I go, yep, that's great. We can have whatever you want. We will do what you'd like us to do. But have you ever considered recycled stone? Have you ever considered that it might be more sustainable to use a stone that's been used before? Not to mention, of course, the character that recycled stone would bring. And then we talk about the use of concrete. Is that sustainable? And I advise that it isn't. And well, what can we do? How do we hold stone in place if it's not concreted? And we provide them with examples of photographs and examples of how we've done that previously and what the implications of not using concrete might be.
Could you just give me in order the things we might have in terms of stone, decking, brick, concrete, what you would recommend? What would be the most environmentally friendly choice?
So as soon as you're recycled, you're already way ahead of everybody else. So I would always recommend that you try to recycle. If the stone has been used before, then already you've got brownie points. The challenge always comes with these things is, how do I secure it? How do I make sure it doesn't move? And there's various ways that we can guide the client when it comes to that. Decking, softwood decking, is probably the worst thing you could possibly have. It's got a lifespan of about 15 years, if you're lucky. The decking will last longer. The joists are likely to go sooner. Often they're tannalized with noxious chemicals, so you're already using horrible chemicals that you don't really want to be promoting. Now, you could make the option of using hardwood. Hardwood's an interesting one, because especially if that hardwood is recycled. So we've taken to using recycled tropical hardwood sleepers for our raised bed areas, and it's a recent discovery for us, but that wood already exists. It doesn't need treatment. It's likely to last a lifetime and more, and it's a great habitat for invertebrates because it's so craggy.
And you can also use that hardwood sleepers for decking.
Yes, you can. Why would you not? And do you need joists? Well, I've used it without joists. I've had reclaimed tropical hardwood sleepers that already exist, that have already been used before, strapped together with steel pieces so that they sit still and they'll last for a lifetime.
And sometimes when we're talking about recycled, people say that actually it's getting very expensive, it's quite difficult to find. So what would you say to them in that case?
You're right. I mean, it's not much cheaper. So is it cheaper at all? The jury's out. What I say to my staff is, the time that you would have spent mixing concrete, you are spending choosing the piece of stone. So when you receive, for instance, we regularly use recycled York stone. When you receive your pallet of York stone, or 2 or 3 pallets often, you're making choices about which piece of stone is going to go where, and that's where your time is spent, because that's how you lock it in. You lock it in between one boundary and another, so it doesn't move, and thereby rid yourself of the need for concrete.
So do you put anything in between them? Do you put sand?
Sometimes we do. We do use sand sometimes we use grit, sometimes we use nothing. We let debris fall into place, and we warn the client that you will need to learn to love weeds. You'll need to learn to deal with them. And so the sooner you understand the beauty of weeds, the better for you.
I'm certainly seeing a lot at the shows at the moment and in garden designers of people using quite a lot of plant material between pavers, so either on a patio or indeed having a path which is almost like stepping stones. So you're doing that quite a lot.
Yes, absolutely. So we might put seedlings into the crevices to promote a particular sort of plant, particularly plants that you can walk on. So the thymes, for instance, the creeping thymes, if it's a sunny spot, you could get away with using those. And in the shadier areas, you might think of using things like baby's tears, as it called them, what the common name of it is. That will spread nicely and create a sort of dampening of sound. So if you plant well and generously, you are likely to remove the competition. So if you get that going very well and you're fastidious in the removal of other things, other competition, then you are likely to reduce your workload going forward. But there is also this idea that if it's not a pervasive weed, if it's not a weed that is going to cause you problems, leave it alone.
I've certainly done that on our terrace, is that I was so sick of us having to weed it, 4 times a year, that we've been allowing daisies to grow.
It's lovely.
Daisies, and actually it is getting lovely.
Yeah.
And I think, haven't yet weeded it this year.
Yeah,
so
good.
that's
It does
from
work,
4 times a year to actually, we've gone all the way to August without.
And these are the efforts that we need to make.
So stone recycled if possible, decking try not to, and if it is, it
Avoid
needs to
it.
be hardwood sleepers. What about brick?
Yeah, brick is actually an interesting one. If it's recycled brick, even more. But brick needs to be contained in a more detailed fashion than a stone might be. So the way we use recycled York stone, for instance, is that we use as large pieces as we can carry, as heavy as they can be, and so they're unlikely to move. Bricks will move very easily. Anybody who's laid a patio, a brick pathway without any way of securing it in position will find very quickly it'll be moving around. So unless you can contain those bricks with, for instance, hardwood sleepers along the edges, some sort of containment from wall to wall, for instance, then they're difficult to use. I have used them this way up and I have used them this way up, and that's better if you can sink them this way up into the ground, then they're more likely to stay. If you can pack them together, even better.
So that's going to use a lot of bricks, isn't it?
It's going to use a lot
so
of bricks.
it would be more expensive. Is there, in your view, an ideal material for a terrace or patio?
It depends on whether you want it to be solid. So let's look at that. An area that you're going to have your gin and tonic on, let's imagine. Why can't that be made of, for instance, wood chip? Why can't it be contained? You could use sleepers on the edges of it to contain the wood chip, and then use piles and piles of wood chip, because wood chip is a waste product. We have lots of it, endless supplies of wood chip. It is a habitat for all the time that exists. It is a habitat for invertebrates, and birds will come and feed on those, so you'll get the benefit of that as well. Does a patio have to be made of hard material?
I suppose people might be thinking about picking up the wood chip on their feet and then tramping it into the house.
So that with gravel.
Yes, exactly, gravel. And what about gravel?
So, gravel is great if you can find it recycled again. Don't forget, all of these things are being dug up from somewhere. They're being transported from somewhere. So all of that has a cost, an environmental cost. So, yes, we have used gravel as well as an alternative to various of those other things. I don't think it's any less or any more wasteful in its carbon footprint than any of the others. I tend not to use it amongst stones because it just gets messy, it moves around, but it is permeable. And that's the other thing to consider about all of these things. Patios, traditionally those that are made with concrete, are impermeable to water. And why is that a problem? Well, as our rain becomes increasingly torrential when it comes, our storm drains are overwhelmed with water. And so if we can get the water into the ground where it belongs, rather than heading it away, if you could leave spaces between those stones, the water would go where it belongs and not through our water system.
Yes, because I think there's been quite a problem in towns and cities with people
concreting over or bricking over or stoning over their front gardens. And then, of course, that means that even if you haven't got an unusual amount of rainfall, even if you've got a completely normal amount of rainfall, it's all going into the drains, and that's where we're getting all that flash flooding.
And if you think all of your neighbours are doing the same, collectively, that's a disaster.
What would you say is the ideal material for paths?
You know, here we use wood chip, and we regularly see blackbirds digging through it to find the invertebrates that are living in there. So you're providing food, it's a waste product, it looks beautiful when it's freshly laid, it looks beautiful as it ages, it feeds the soil. Win, 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 it seems to me.
What would you say is the sort of, as it were, the second most environmental material for paths?
I think it would be a recycled stone. I would constantly look for those. Now, when you're using stone, aesthetically, we move ourselves towards stone rather than concrete. And I understand why that is. I think it's much more interesting. It looks better in the rain, for instance. But if you're using recycled materials, we would do well to reconsider the concept of concrete, especially if it's recycled. So our understanding of what is aesthetically acceptable to us needs to make some adjustment, is my feeling.
So you're saying recycled concrete would be all right?
Yes. Anything recycled, you've already got brownie points.
Yeah. So there's quite a lot of recycled concrete stone look pavers around, aren't
Yes, there are. And, you know, if you look at them when they're new, my feeling is, my God, they look ugly. But if you consider them as a second-hand asset, then I think they are a much more attractive proposition because they are second-hand.
And would you also say that, for example, if you've got a terrace and you want to make it bigger, because a lot of terraces are too small, that maybe adding on in a different material might be a better thing than digging the whole thing up?
For sure. I mean, why wouldn't you add on a different material? The client may say, well, it's just going to look odd. And I go, well, just consider that oddness for a moment. Juxtapose that oddness that you're feeling with taking all that patio up, using all that energy in taking the existing patio up, sending those materials to the recycling centre and starting all over again. Just consider what impact you're having on the environment, and let's juxtapose that with the oddness that you're feeling and see if the oddness wins out. Because my inclination is we just need to take a little step forward and we'll be there.
Yes, because mixed pavers can look gorgeous.
Of course they can.
You've also mentioned the cost of actually getting rid of something that's already in your garden, whether it's digging up a terrace or a path or anything. So what have been the ways that you've used to keep and reuse something in the garden when the client has wanted a change?
So we, for instance, made Rubble gardens where, you know, when you start a garden afresh, a garden hasn't been cultivated previously, you'll find bricks, you'll find pieces of concrete, you'll find oak paving slabs, and we have made beds, planting areas with well-drained, low-fertility growing substrates that allow us to plant a different sort of plant, a drought-tolerant sort of planting, I guess, and ask the client to consider that too looks beautiful. Well, it looks beautiful because it hasn't gone to the recycling centre. And there's a feeling that we gain from that. Maybe it's a smugness, but maybe not. Is that there's a feeling of doing some good to the environment. And we would do well to learn different sorts of feelings when it comes to what we get when we look at a garden. I know what I get when I look at a high-end magazine that's where there are lots of gardens with endless amounts of stone and endless amounts of concrete and water being directed into the storm drains and little room for nature. I know the feeling I get there. It isn't a good feeling. So what are the good feelings? What does make us feel good? And it's time for us to ask ourselves. I suspect, as time has gone on, that more and more people are realising something, and let's grow that feeling.
Yes, absolutely. A friend of mine did very well, is that she had a terrace dug up and she had all the pavers, the concrete pavers, put into Gabions.
Yeah,
and it's become a wonderful wildlife haven.
It's great, and councils are using them now as well. So every time something like that heads towards the recycling centre, there's an enormous waste going on. Not only of labour costs, but the carbon footprint associated with it going, the carbon footprint associated with it being crushed up, etc., etc., etc. Far better not to remove aggregates and not to bring fresh ones in, unless you have to.
And of course, people can also get rid of them through things like Facebook and Marketplace and Freegal and things like that. People can actually come and take them away and use them, and no money is exchanged at all.
Absolutely right. We should make more use of those things.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in terms of, sustainability in plants, were you thinking native plants, or is it really propagation that is at the heart of it?
I think the whole concept of native planting is a little bit of a red herring and an obsession we really shouldn't be focusing on too much. There are instances, native plants are really important, don't get me wrong, and there are instances where the planting of a particular species, Prunus spinosa, I know that there is a certain butterfly that will only lay its eggs on that plant. So if we don't plant that plant, then that butterfly will not have somewhere to lay its eggs. I get that. And so they're important. But as the climate warms and insects are flying in the middle of winter when they weren't before, we would be mindful to be thinking about international planting, and that's the way we look at it. So everything in this garden, for instance, is here for a reason. It's either very useful for wildlife in one way or another, or it's been propagated here. So our focus is really on the value that it brings to the environment. My inclination is that everything needs to be contributing to the environment in a positive way. Otherwise, why is it there? We would be wise to start to consider where our plants are coming from. When you import plants, we have little control of what they're grown in, what chemicals are used, how they were grown, how much energy was used in forcing them to flower. Garden centres regularly, if you go to a garden centre, you'll find lots of plants will be in flower out of their regular season. And it encourages people to buy. Part of our work is re-educating the public and asking them to consider one plant against another. One is in full flower, out of season. The other hasn't yet come into flower, but will, and is grown here. That's quite a challenge to get people to give up their impulse buy when we explain to them it shouldn't actually be in flower, and it probably won't return to its normal behaviour until next year.
What about the ponds? Now, you said you've got 6 ponds here, and ponds is something you always want to put in.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me the different ways you've actually sort of, as it were, hardscaped the ponds?
Yep, so we've made them from all sorts of things, from baths, from sinks. We use butyl, we use preformed ponds. We make ponds that are contained in sleepers with a liner internally. Basically anything that won't leak water can be sunk in the ground to make a pond.
And when you're talking about the plastic and the butyl liners,
no.
It's a plastic that will last for a long time. It's not a single-use plastic, and therefore it's not causing as much problem to the environment.
I mean, you're absolutely right. It is, however, plastic.
Yeah.
But everything we do has an impact. The problem with plastic bags is we throw them away. Plastic is a highly engineered material of great value. What we should be doing is using them again and again and again and again and again, which is what we promote here. So creating a plastic liner for a pond that is going to promote biodiversity and encourage wildlife, I suspect is probably the right thing to do. It'll last a very long time.
And what about sheds, greenhouses? What would your advice be if somebody wants to save some money, have a nice garden, but
Be sustainable.
Be sustainable.
Second hand, all the way. And there are lots of people who want to get rid of their sheds and their greenhouses. Now, I'm not suggesting it's easy by any means, and you would probably need a builder or something to help you with that. But if you can go down the route of second-hand, then do. Alternatively, something that's going to be for life. We've got ourselves into this culture of throwaway. I'll get the cheapest one. Yes, get the cheapest one, but you're likely to get another one in 10 years because it'll go. So here we promote tools for life. If you go to any superstore, you'll see the vast array of tools that are available to us. Many of them won't last longer than a year. Then my advice always is buy a tool that's going to last you for a lifetime. You'll need to spend more. We have to understand as a society that buy cheap, buy twice. These sayings are there for a reason. They're true. So if you can invest a little more in buying something that's been well made, that will last you a long time, then that's the choice to make.
Many people say that it can be quite hard to find recycled items, or that they're very expensive when you do find them. And that can be true. But it is really worth looking in garage sales, junk yards, architectural salvage yards, second-hand shops, charity shops, and also online marketplaces like Facebook Marketplace and eBay, and the exchange sites as well, FreeCycle and Freegal. And you can even use things that you've already got in a different way. And it really helps to look at videos or read blog posts featuring the way other people have used recycled items, because you're not necessarily going to do exactly what they've done, but the more you see recycled things, the more likely you are to be able to adapt it to your own garden style. So don't miss this video coming up, which is about Kathy's cottage garden, which she created from scratch using very little hard landscaping and using lots of recycled things. And I hope you'll get some good ideas from that, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.